Hi, I'm BJ, and this is the Arcane Alienist Podcast. Hi, everybody. I'm going to play a couple of calls from some callers, and then I'm going to get into recaps of two campaigns that I've been a part of that have recently come to their natural conclusion. Echoes of Fomalhaut in DCC, in which I was a player, and the Storm King's Thunder for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, in which I have been the Dungeon Master. So that's what we have on tap today, so let's get going.
Hey BJ, Jason here. Regarding your question, would you have a chance of accidentally releasing your missile if you're hit? I would definitely. I said if you had somebody in a second rank firing a missile and they were hit prior to their shooting or hit when they have simultaneous initiative, I would have a chance, maybe a dex check, to see if they accidentally release the missile and hit the character in front of them. I wouldn't do that just for bows. I would do it for any missile weapon, without a doubt. So. Keep up the great work. Talk to you soon.
That was Jason Connerly of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. Thanks for the clarification. That was in response to, I think, the previous episode where he had said he would do that with the bow, and I was just wondering if he would also rule doing that with other missile weapons. And I think that's fair. I think if you only rule that with bows, then you may have to counterbalance. Well, then why would anybody use a bow? You got to come up with other ways to enhance the bow to still make it a fair trade-off compared to a crossbow or a sling or something like that. So yeah, just a nice simple rule of making it all missile weapons, I think, is a good idea. Of course, we're talking about old school D&D rules here, for old school essentials or BX or things like that. So thanks for the call, Jason. Always appreciate it.
All right, TJ, your most recent episode talked about labyrinths and finding a Minotaur's lair. Did I get you right? You stripped away all the kerfuffle of mapping, sprawling corridors, etc., and you handled things with like a saving throw and a random roll, something like that. Because if I've got you right, that makes total sense to me. I avoid those kind of sprawling areas of dungeons just because I find them kind of tedious to describe, and if the players want to make a map, which I tend to discourage actually, but if they do, it gets super long-winded, and I'm just checking that I've understood you right. Take care, mate, and I'll catch you later.
And that is Colin Green of the Spike Pit podcast and YouTube channel. Yeah, Colin, this was specifically because it was meant to be because it's a Minotaur's lair, meant to be confusing and easy to get lost, and the idea that mapping or keeping any sense of direction should be impossible to kind of reflect the theme of a Minotaur. And so it wasn't something really meant for all dungeons, but it was meant to mimic that when you go between these sort of natural chambers and crossroads where things can happen, you're just going through a confusing maze of tunnel, nondescript, indistinguishable tunnels, just hoping that you kind of pop out somewhere. Somebody did think to use their weapon to etch a line into the wall that they could follow through one section, so I allowed them to move back and forth between those two sections at one point, but that only lasted a round. But yeah, the idea is the first chamber you enter, you're subject to a spell effect that causes disorientation, and then if you fail, you get forced to move in a random direction instead of the direction you want to go or you think you're going by looking on the map. And from there, we don't show the map, we just show the chambers that people pop into, and what they encounter there. And then if they go, it is a random, like there were 6 chambers, so I just rolled a 6-sided dice and decided which chamber they managed to find their way to each time they entered the twisty-turny labyrinth. But they couldn't see the labyrinth. There was no mapping of the labyrinth because it's meant to be an impossible task. I think you could use that, though, in dungeons to just say, let's just concentrate on the chambers and just draw a line. This chamber leads to this chamber. I don't know how you would do that. Maybe that sparks a little more thought on you there. So, but this was meant to be representative, sort of getting lost and disoriented, which I don't know if that's what you're going for, or if you just want to cut out sort of the boring elements of having to describe every tunnel and passage and hallway that is really just meant to leave you from point A to point B. I remember mapping back in the day, getting into those things with all kinds of twisting, turning, and me getting frustrated at the DM and the DM getting frustrated at me because it just gets hard to describe in adequate detail. At some point, you're just like, just let me show you the map, and at that point, it defeats the purpose of having a mapper and having the players having to keep up with that information and risking making a mistake. So I don't know. Hopefully, Colin, that answers your question. Again, I would reference the YouTube video from Dungeon Craft. That there's a link in the previous show's description of how he did that in his version of the Minotaur's Lair. But if I didn't answer the question, maybe give me another call and we'll have some more discussion on it, because anything to save any of the tedium when it comes to mapping or description, so you get down to the action, get down to the stuff that's really interesting and fun. And that's always a good thing to do. So let me know what you think. So this will be about a month late relative to when we wrapped up the Dungeon Crawl Classics campaign that Carl Rodriguez has been GMing, the Echoes of Fomalhaut. The campaign isn't necessarily over. We may revisit the same characters and the same, pick up where we left off with a new story arc at some point in the near future, but we kind of reached a natural breaking point, so it is kind of the end of that campaign, for the time being anyway. Recall what we had been doing was we had walked through a portal into another, from this desert setting that we were in to begin with, into this lush forest, and come across a castle, and we spent the bulk of our time trying to clear out this castle, which has been ruled by a coven of hags. And we've learned little snippets of the history of this castle. It's changed hands between various people in the past. So we did, as of the next to last session, we pretty much cleared the whole castle. The only thing left was the dungeon below. So about when we got down there and started exploring, about half of the dungeon in the lower level castle was where the trolls had been kept, which we had been fighting. They were sort of servants of these hags. So it was mostly empty because the trolls had already come up from the dungeon and we had fought all of them. So for the most part, we had about half of that dungeon kind of pre-cleared for us. We did find a room with a statue of a kind of bizarre chimera-like dwarf man thing. That the inscription said to offer something, and we kept piling money on it, hoping to get something magic, and eventually we piled enough that the gold just disappeared and never came back. So our loss. It was a minor annoyance, but nothing really too bad. The main thing, though, that happened is first we were exploring through to the dungeon, and we come down to a corridor, and we come to a room. There's an inscription on the not the room, a chamber with a door. And there's an inscription on the door that says, "The mighty hand shall no fire wither. A brave heart shall from grief not dither, nor sharp eye from quarry stray. Thus stride you, for 'tis the true way." And there are three. There's this inscription, and there are these three runes or icons or symbols on the door. And so we kind of had to solve this riddle, and what we figured out was, the mighty hand shall no fire wither. There's a inscription of a hand or a fist, and we have to touch fire to that. No brave heart from grief shall dither. From that one, I think we figured out if we put a tear, could come up with a tear and touch it to that would work. No sharp eye from quarry stray. Stuck an arrow into the symbol under that one. and then we had to sort of turn this locking mechanism to open it. First, we turned it the wrong way, and it didn't work, and everybody had to make a saving throw and took some damage. But then we went back and turned the lock and repeated the process and turned the rock the light way. That was an eye, by the way, no sharp eye from Quarry Strays. Jabbed an arrow into the eye. And so it opens into a passageway, and we come to a room where there is a being suspended over a pit by chains attached to 4 pillars. And then of course we've got this ghostly seneschal with us who is been helping us out, who's the sort of the major domo or the seneschal of the castle, who says he served the original lord of the castle, a warlord named Zorak, before this female heroic kind of paladin-like character had come in and taken over and run him out, and basically, I don't know how good she was. She walled this guy up, Edgar Allan Poe style, in a room, and left him chained to the wall to starve to death. But anyway, so this guy has kind of been pretty loyal to us, and my character Burnfried, a cleric, has been using him. Everybody kind of decided Burnfried would be the new lord of the castle. It was sort of thrust upon me. It wasn't something I really lobbied for, but I agreed to do it. And so this seneschal has accepted me as the new lord of the castle, and he's going to be my seneschal until we get to this room. And then there's this figure in kind of dark black armor and very sinister looking warrior suspended by magical chains over this pit. And this is actually Zorak, and he is now an undead, kind of a death knight type of character. And he says, release me that I can, and kind of I'll be in charge of the castle, but as gratitude, you'll be greatly rewarded. And we're thinking, well, we're kind of already pushing the limits of our, we're all, I think we've got 1 lawful character in the party and 2 neutral characters. So dealing with the undead is not real palatable or kind of already in a gray area, kind of using this one guy. I mean, we're in control of him, but also not really wanting to cede the castle we work so hard to just clear out to this guy. And there's really no way for us to gauge how powerful he was, but we decided we were going to go ahead and fight. So Ardath, the warrior, who is played by Arlen Walker, proceeds to cut the chains with his magical greatsword, and I prepared that when he cuts the chains, I was going to cast Turn the Unholy on this thing. So he cut the chains, trying to be it like. He's also going to try to get in a quick attack on the guy by pretending, I've just got my sword out because I'm cutting these chains. Don't worry about me. But Zorak didn't fall for it. My Turn the Unholy didn't work. I think Ardath did get a hit on him before the guy turned on us. And we had a couple rounds of combat. But the big thing that happened was, and this is one of the really cool things about Dungeon Crawl Classics, Jason, who's playing Idris Khan, the Necromancer, used Magic Missile, and I think he hit him twice. Once he rolled really high on his spell roll. The first time it did, I can't remember if it did like 20 or 30 points of damage, but then he just rolled so high, and I think he spell burned some stuff. He managed to basically get 108 points of damage with a Magic Missile spell, and just obliterated this Death Knight right there in front of us. So we had kind of wondered if this Morag, the seneschal, was gonna side with his old boss, but he didn't even get a chance to act before Jason just toasted this Death Knight, and we're like, well, what do you think of that? And he was like, well, I'm glad that I stayed on your side, basically. And so that's really where we left off. We dealt with a puzzle, and there was some other stuff, like we explored each of the rooms, but a lot of them were empty and didn't have a lot of stuff in them. So there was a lot of exploring kind of the empty rooms in the dungeon, and then this was sort of the final thing we got to. We had to do a little more exploration after that just to kind of connect and make sure we found all the rooms. But that was the big deal, is we of course Lord Zorak was the oldest known ruler of this castle. He was obviously imprisoned here and cursed by the lady of the castle that replaced him. Of course, we found her body in a great fight with a cloaker that was disguised as a canopy over the bed that was used as her final resting place. And then she was supplanted by the hags, as far as anybody knows. So that's where we left off with Bernfried as Lord of the Castle. I've inherited or found in the previous adventure a magical longsword. It's not completely sentient, but it certainly has a purpose and a will. And its job is to encourage and reward help people who are ambitious achieve their goals. So I think Bernfried has an ambition here. If we return to it, if he's found this castle, he's a cleric of the god of puzzles and mysteries, and so he thinks he's been called to solve all the mysteries of this castle. How did it get here? What's its history? Why does it have all these portals in the nooks and crannies that lead places? Why is there a portal out in the forest nearby? Are they all connected? What's going on? Is this some sort of cosmic crossroads, or did a wizard kind of build this and leave it behind? So what's going on here? He wants to solve the puzzle and the mystery of this place. That's an ambition. Obviously, Ardath, the warrior, has a lot of ambition to be a great warrior and a great warlord. So as long as I'm helping him along that path, I think that the sword will be satisfied. And I think as a neutral cleric, I can do it without getting into any, having to get into any kind of alignment issues of too far with chaos. And then as Jason has been playing Idris, doing a very good job of role-playing him, he's gotten more and more restless to get to the desert, because he comes to the desert, and the patron he serves as a wizard is otherworldly patron of the desert and of sand and dust, and he doesn't like this environment. He wants to get back to the desert, or turn the place into a desert would be his alternative. So I think Bernfried's idea is that he's going to help his ally Idris find a way to get to a desert environment where he'll be happy before he decides to just turn on everybody, because he is a chaotic character and try to turn this place into a wasteland. So that's where we wrapped up on Echoes of Fomalhaut. I had a great time. Had not been real eager to play DCC from what I'd heard of it. I mean, curious, I wanted to try it, but a lot of the thoughts are like, I don't know if I like this kind of the swinginess of these spell rolls, and it is a very crunchy system because it's still kind of grounded. It's not as complicated as 3.5, but it is built on that 3.5 D&D engine, but I really enjoyed it. I would definitely play DCC and the other variants, like Mutant Crawl Classics or the other sorts of games that they've got in that family of games. Would be happy to play them again. Not sure I'm quite ready to run one as a DM, but I'll probably get there eventually. So that's where we left off, and I think Carl ran a very good campaign arc for us, and I really enjoyed playing with Arlen and with Jason and with the other player that was with us, who doesn't have a podcast, it doesn't have a public-facing image or persona here. But so that same group is going to be now. We're going to keep playing, and on the Saturday morning rotation, we've been playing this game, and I am going to run Temple of Elemental Evil through Old School Essentials for those guys. So we'll have some future report outs on how that goes once we've had a few sessions. So, but that's it for Dungeon Crawl Classics for now. So I've had 2 sessions of 5th edition Storm King's Thunder. We finished the campaign. I waited to give the recap until we finished the campaign, so this will be the summary of what happened over the course of 2 different game sessions, because the first part of the final boss fight kind of drug out a little bit during the first session, more than I intended it to. So where we left off is the party had rescued King Hecaton and restored him to his throne. And they wanted to. Everybody wanted to go after the Blue Dragon, Imrith, who had started all this. Ultimately, was responsible for the death of Hecaton's wife, the Queen, his disappearance, all the upheaval that was caused as a result of that, including the death of Calder, who's one of the characters in the party, the death of his brother, who was the original kind of leader of the party. So everybody's got a mat on for Imrith. I had kind of worried that at this point they were going to be 10th level and they were going to just curb stomp her, even as being a powerful blue dragon in her lair. So I had kind of conspired, working up across several sessions, knowing this was coming, to turn her into a Dracolich. So when they finally fight her, she is an ancient blue dragon Dracolich that gives her a few other abilities and resistances in her lair. So how I said is, the month had gone by. Ultimately Orcus had tricked Calmer, who was a paladin warlock, that Orcus was his patron, even though he is an evil. Orcus was his patron because Orcus he had died in Orcus while fighting he was fighting an incursion from the abyss when he was sort of taken into the abyss and was dying, and Orcus couldn't bargain with him to save him. So he's trying to redeem himself. He's trying to figure out how to get out of this pact, and Orcus basically tricks him into doing the thing that turns Imrith into a Dracolich. But I said a month passes, and one of the things that Calmar did in that time is he had sought out the followers of Elastrae, who in Forgotten Realms is the goddess of Drow, who flee from Menzo Berenzon and the evil, wicked Drow society up to the surface, and reject the darkness and things like that. So he had sought out the followers of Elastrae and could have swore a new paladin oath and a new pact as a warlock with her, and so now he's operating as an Oath of Redemption paladin multi-classed with a celestial warlock. So made some changes to some of his class abilities, but most of them stayed the same. So a month passes, and Hecaton summons the party back, sends word that he would like to speak to them all again. He reveals that he has located the exact location of Imrith's lair in a ruin out in the desert of Anarok. And he would like them to join him and some of his guards to his warriors to go deal with her once and for all. And so the storm giants teleport him into the desert right outside of this, and it's a ruined amphitheater from a ruined Netherese, ancient Netherese ruins. But I also knew that if they walked in there with half a dozen storm giants, it didn't matter how much I souped up Imrith. I remember it being very anticlimactic when I played this as a player, because we took her out really quick, because we had a party of storm giants, and we had all geared up and maxed out and stuff. So I wanted it to be a much more interesting fight. So what I also did was sort of change the parameters a little bit, so that Imrith, anticipating storm giants would be coming after her, had put glyphs of warding on the paving stones all through this amphitheater, and then of course they're covered with sand because they're in the desert, a light layer of sand. And the glyphs of warding are triggered to cast banishment anytime a giant steps on them. And so by the time the giants had managed to make it through the sort of these entryways into the center of the amphitheater, where there's a big sinkhole that leads into Imrith's lair, all of them but King Hecaton himself had basically been banished into another dimension for the time being. I thought more of them would get through, but I was kind of pleasantly surprised as the DM that I managed to that happened, just because I think it made I wanted the fight, if there's going to be a victory, I wanted it to be the player's victory and not a bunch of NPCs' victory. Also, there were a bunch of gargoyles perched throughout the bleachers of the amphitheater, including two crews who were operating trebuchets. And so Hecaton took a lot of pounding from trebuchet while they were just trying to fight their way in to be able to go down into Imrith's lair. It also turns out, and I'll have to remember this for the future in 5e, is that gargoyles make really good fodder because they have they have resistance to damage if it's not magical. And so these storm giants, their strength is such that they could hit as long as they didn't roll a 1. These huge great swords that they're armed with but they're not magical swords because these are just regular storm giants. And so it would take a storm giant like 4 solid hits, and these things do like a handful of D12 damage. Still, one storm giant would have to hit a single gargoyle 4 times, which would take them a couple of rounds to do to take one out. And there's like 30 gargoyles, so the gargoyles were doing very minimal damage, but they were definitely just preventing the giants from just running in and going wherever they wanted to. They had to fight their way through them, and that's what got kind of drug out and why we had to go over and do a second session. So even though it drugged things out, it was to me a very interesting. I don't know. The players didn't seem to get too frustrated with it. They just kind of recognized we're in the final boss fight. This is naturally going to be tough. And one of the players got dropped. He got surrounded by some gargoyles and dropped, but the other people were able to save him before he died and get him healed up. But we come back for the second session. We kind of wrap up fairly quickly with the gargoyles once the tide turned. But, of course, every time the giants advance a little farther, another one disappears on one of these runes, and there are just so many of them, it's hard for them to avoid them or see them all. So we get to the final fight. Hecaton is still with the party. Also, what I had done was, if you'll recall, a little over a year ago, one of the guys who played with us passed away unexpectedly. And I kind of quietly just retired his character when we came back. I just said he kind of faded in the background and then went off on his own direction at the next kind of logical point in the campaign. Well, when Hecaton brings everybody together, I decided to bring this character back, and everybody was happy to see that. And I just ran him as an NPC, as an original party member and a valuable party member because he's a arcane archer, rogue multi-class, so very, very well built for doing some really cool stuff with his magic arrows. So he was with the party, and so they make their way down into Emerald's lair. It's kind of hard to move around because there's some big piles of sand. So some of them go down a staircase and have to work their way through. Some of them just drop through this big sinkhole and take the last few gargoyles down with them and have to fight it out on top of this big pile of sand. But as they finally all kind of regroup in the vicinity of this big pile of sand under the sinkhole, they're hearing chanting coming from farther deeper in this ruin in Draconic. And so when they approach into the room where the chanting's coming from, they see there are some cultists who turn out to be Yuan-Ti, who are standing before a big statue of Tiamat. In the game, in the module is written it's Dendar the Night Serpent, but I thought it would be much more satisfying given how I'd sort of altered the plot, which I'll review again how I altered the plot when I get done with the summary of what happened, for it to be Tiamat. And Harshnag, the frost giant who had been their ally, who they thought Emerald had killed, is chained to the thing, and I put him at half health. The idea being that he didn't actually die in that confrontation with Emerald at the Eye of the Allfather, but she brought him back to her lair and has chained him up. And these cultists look like they're about to do some kind of sacrifice or ritual with Harshnag as an offering. There's a big pit next to the statue that they're going to toss him into whenever they finish whatever it is they're doing. So the party starts to attack the Yuan-Ti to try to rescue Harshnag. There's also, again, big piles of sand in the corners of this room, and Emerald is burrowed into one of them, and none of them notice this when they come through the room. But when she does move to attack, I gave them another chance to perceive them, and enough of them saw it that there wasn't any surprise. So you've got Emerald, this ancient blue Dracolich, standing on this big sand dune in the corner of this room, and then these cultists over on the far side of the room surrounding this pit where they're about to sacrifice Harshnag. The party and Hecaton. Final fight. So they do manage to kind of pick off slowly the cultists. Hecaton goes straight for the fight with Emerald, naturally. He's immune to lightning, and I figured she would know that because he's a storm giant. But she does unleash her lightning breath first thing and drops like I mean, I thought we were going to kill somebody. This one player, this character, this time around. But a couple of them do go into death saves, but the party's cleric is able, Afgrim is able to kind of get them back on their feet. The dwarven cleric, and so they all slowly are able to, through healing potions and spells, kind of get themselves back up. As Harshnag is primarily the one engaging with Imrith. She used her breath weapon; it doesn't recharge, so she's got to focus more on attacks right there. Is she's got the storm giant in the face, and that's ultimately what Hecaton was. Is he served as sort of a target to kind of keep some heat off everybody else while they were able to finish off the cultists, heal themselves back up, free Harshnag. Although Harshnag never wound up taking so long to get him loose because of the magic chains that was binding him. They had to hack through him. That he really never got into the fight. But it was sort of a distraction of, you got all these things to do while you've got this deadly foe who, the longer you wait, the more she's gonna, whittle you guys down. And she, Dor the Goblin Barbarian, after they kind of were able to focus on Imrith, ran and jumped on her. Actually had Hecaton pick him up and toss him at her, and he landed on her and was then sort of riding on her back, fighting barbarian style. Kalmar, the redeemed now paladin warlock, drank a potion of giant size and increased himself to a giant and size, and came over and began getting melee with his flame tongue great sword that he had picked up. Dryas, our archer who had been Eric's character, managed to get in a couple of good sneak attacks with his and limit her movement with one of his magic arrows, to where any movement would cause automatic damage. So they kind of kept her in the corner for a little longer, didn't let her dart around the room the way she might have ordinarily. So good job of pinning her down to let Hecaton get in the way, and then everybody else kind of recouped from almost getting killed from her breath. The other thing I did with this campaign is I used a supplement that I would highly recommend anybody do this. It's called Doom of the Desert, and you can get it on DriveThruRPG, and it gives some pointers on how to and I'm looking at the PDF, and the author is not the thing I downloaded doesn't have the name of the author, which is unfortunate, but you can find it on DriveThruRPG. But the main thing I incorporated from this was a system of colossal combat, where when you're fighting this large creature like an ancient dragon, you have its general armor class and hit points, but then you assign the head and each of the limbs or wings or whatever you might have a more difficult armor class. So in this case, her armor class is 22. The head is a 24, and the limbs and wings and tail are 23. And then you divvy up the hit points across those different parts. So you're still taking general damage. You can make a general regular D&D style attack and take off some hit points, and you're still taking off the total hit points. So if they get to 0 hit points, you defeated the monster. But if you can specifically take, say, 50 hit points off the head, again at a -2 or attacking at AC 24 instead of 22, she's blinded for a round. If you can specifically take the designated number of hit points off a limb, that limb becomes useless. If it's a wing, you can no longer fly. If it's a leg, you can't move it anymore, and that creates a problem for any other kind of movement that would involve legs, and also attacks, say from a claw, from a front leg. Or can't make a bite attack from the head if the head gets incapacitated. Now, it wasn't real clear in the PDF what to do if they... I mean, obviously, if you disable a creature's head, that's the end. So I just treated it as useless for a round. She was blinded and couldn't bite. But then I just restored the 50 hit points to her head. I didn't restore them to her hit point total. Just kind of recharged the head with 50 hit points from her total hit point pool. Again, counting, but as they whittle it away, it would go to 0. And so they did manage to knock her head out of commission once. and I let them know this is advised in the PDF, since it says an unusual form of a deviation from D&D combat, to let the players know we got some special rules with this creature. Here's it's more difficult to hit these things, but these are the potential effects. And I think it would be very useful to use with other large creatures, like again, maybe not young dragons, but certainly with ancient dragons, maybe adult dragons, certainly with giants, titans, or if you're going to do a fight with a kraken or something like that. So that called shots matter something, and it's pretty straightforward. So I would really recommend that Doom of the Desert. It's cheap, it's not expensive, and those rules, I think, particularly for 5e, you can probably import them to other versions of D&D as well, give you a way to make fighting a huge creature more of a, it feels like that should be an option you have in D&D anyway. So I thought it went really well, and they used it strategically. But ultimately, again, critical hits. At the end, you've kind of got her. Maybe they had it kind of worn down, maybe a little over half, and then when Kalmar quaffs that giant-sized potion and steps up and attacks with his flaming greatsword, which when you take a potion of giant strength, that increases your size, it gives you extra hit points, it puts your strength at 25, and it also increases I think you double maybe the damage dice, or maybe triple the damage dice of the weapon you're using. And this is a greatsword, flame tongue. So you're rolling dice on the fire, you're rolling dice on the sword itself. And he gets off a pretty powerful hit. He's got multi-attack at this point. Gets off a pretty powerful hit on his first attack, and then crits on his second attack, and I think he got over 100 points of damage. And that was the end of Imrith. And that was really funny, because that's exactly how I defeated Imrith, playing a barbarian as a player. It was anticlimactic when we did it, because we had this full complement of storm giants and not enough things to spread the fight out over so many rounds. I mean, we took her out in like 3 rounds because we were able to just swarm on her before. And I feel like some of the optional rules I used to kind of shrink down the pool of giants that they had to fight, and I deviated, because the cultists are also supposed to just ignore the as written, just kind of ignore the players, unless the players, they're not supposed to be really helping Imrith. They're just trying to make a sacrifice to Dindar the Night Serpent in Forgotten Realms lore. So between using them as this sort of minions and fodder, and spreading some things around the chamber, I felt that did better than if I just run the encounter as it was written, and adding in those optional rules for colossal combat, which I really love. I'm going to keep those in my back pocket from here on out. So that's how it ended. It was a two session fight for them to get into Imrith's lair, and then to encounter and do that. And of course, there's lots of treasure to be found, but it's the end of the campaign, so we didn't bother to really dig into what they found. The big thing being they recovered the rod that allows Hekaton to use the Wormskull throne again, that Imrith had stolen when they had caught her in disguise from when she had infiltrated the Storm Giant's court. So what did I change in retrospect? I may have alluded to some of these changes in my Making It Your Own. The main thing, and this has been a repeated criticism of Storm King's Thunder. I think Storm King's Thunder has a very good basic premise. It's got the good skeleton for a good campaign. But here's the backstory, and so this is probably even more spoilers for what's going on behind the scenes. But the premise behind Storm King's Thunder is that it occurs after the first 5e big campaign, which is the Tyranny of Dragons, which includes Horde of the Dragon Queen and Rise of Tiamat, where the Cult of the Dragon attempts to free Tiamat from her prison in the Nine Hells. So the premise here is that kind of went and happened. Dragons are the ancient enemy of giants. Giants didn't really do much to intervene there. And it was the small folk, the humans and elves and dwarves and stuff that took care of it. And so Anam, who is the head of the giant god, the head of the Giants pantheon, and is so frustrated and angry with all the Giants that he dismantles the ordning that keeps all the Giants kind of in their rank and file system. And so now the Storm Giants are no longer on top, and all these giant nobles are vying for power, and Giants are running amok all over the Forgotten Realms, and that's supposed to be the thing. But then the mission becomes to go find Hecaton, who's gone missing through the machinations of a dragon. It really didn't have anything to do with the ordning being shattered. And there's no resolution to the problem that the ordning, putting Hecaton back on the throne doesn't change the fact that the ordning has been disrupted. At no point do you interact with Anam or agents of Anam or priests of Anam or anything like that and get the sense that, hey, if you just kind of do this, Anam everything will be cool with him. So I changed the premise to be that the Storm Giant's place at the top is what keeps all the other giants in line. The ordning is a natural outgrowth of that. It's not necessarily divinely ordained. Or if it is, Anam has just said, you have to do this, Storm Giants. Or whoever can stay on top rules over the other giants. Not that it's just chaos, that he's just washed his hands of them. It has nothing to do with Anam. It has to do with the fact that Hecaton has gone missing. The Storm Giants' court is in chaos, and that lets all the other types of giants kind of off the leash to kind of make their play for power. The idea here is that Imrith has done this as a follower of Tiamat, because dragons and giants and Forgotten Realms have this ancient animosity towards one another. So that is just a machination of Tiamat and her worshippers to try to cause problems for the giants. Also knowing that the giants won't be able to stop them if they kind of make a move. At least the evil dragons, of Faerun do that. So that made much more sense to me as a plot. And I'm not the only person to arrive at this. I kind of stood out to me when I read it through the adventure, but then and in talking with other people who have run it or who are running it in discussion groups, a lot of people arrived at that same conclusion and kind of came with the same solution of, let's just say that it's the absence of Hecaton that has emboldened the fire giants and the hill giants and the storm giant or cloud giants to try to make a play for power. I almost abandoned the Kraken plot and tried to rework that as another Cult of the Dragon, because it's just, where's this Kraken and why is it in there? But it was a fun, you still don't know what the players never get a chance to see. Well, why did she ally herself with the Kraken Society when she's got all these dragon cultists that'll help her? The Cult of the Dragon, though, doesn't really feature that heavily in the module, so I added them as sort of villains and inserted places where they would encounter the Cult of the Dragon, to kind of reinforce that there's something going on with the dragons in here, and you got to figure out what it is. So that was the major change of the plot I made. I also, again, having a warlock who had inadvertently got himself into an obligation to Orcus. I like that idea of, well, ultimately Orcus pulled one on over everybody because he created an undead dragon. So, as the demon prince of undeath, any kind of creation of liches, Draco liches, powerful undead would be to his liking. So I managed to work that in there as a specific player, hook in for a specific player, so that would make sense. And so I could ramp up Imrith's power at the end, as I mentioned. But that's it. I felt like the campaign, if I'll be honest, drug on longer than it needed to. If I were to ever run it again, I know where I would make cuts and how I would adjust the pacing up and down to kind of get more. It can be kind of exhausting in that middle section because you're on fetch quests back and forth all over northern Faerun. It gets easy, and I felt like sometimes the players, and also we were playing every other week, which by default playing every other week usually means sometimes you go 3 or 4 weeks without playing, particularly around holidays or somebody's taking a family vacation. So I think the campaign went on a little longer than it should have, and there are probably ways that I figured out and talking to other people online who've also faced similar problems, ways to sort of parse it down and make it run quicker and more smoothly through some plot changes and just some refocusing. So if you are going to run Storm King's Thunder, I would recommend it, but I would recommend you read it. I would recommend that you really consider, you don't have to take my plot changes, but don't be afraid to change the plot to something that's a little more manageable that you think your players will enjoy. And certainly look online at Reddit and some of the Facebook groups and other places where people are discussing what's worked and not worked and how they've changed or preserved elements of the game. Because it's still a lot of fun. It's still a very good storyline. It just sort of needs a little tweaking to make it all make sense. And you might find a different way to connect. You might want to bring in Anam as a more central figure lurking in the shadows and come up with a reason for why he shattered the ordning and he was going to entrust a bunch of small folk to reset it. I don't know. But anyway, it is over. I will now be transitioning to running the Temple of Elemental Evil with my 5e group using Goodman Games 5e conversion. So now I'm going to have 2 versions of that campaign running at once, one in 5e and one in Old School Essentials. It'll be fun to see how the different groups work with the different rule sets and see what happens. So those will probably be where my recaps as a game master focus on, and then maybe a little more few and far between because I'm going to try to wait to do those recaps in places where both groups have kind of got to a close enough point together that I can compare and contrast and not provide spoilers, because I know I have people in both groups that listen to the podcast, so I don't want to spoil the campaign for one group because I've described what another group that's gotten to that point in the campaign, what they encountered or what they did. So that's it. I've wrapped up that campaign and had a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to starting over at first level with some fresh characters. And that'll be it for this episode. Thank you for listening, and I'll be back later with another episode at some point in the next week or so. Take care out there. Thanks for listening to the Arcane Alienist podcast. The music you're hearing is Come and Get It by Scott Holmes Music. The cover art I use for the episodes is by Dave Bone. Be sure and check out his website, ironseer.com, for a lot of other great gaming-related content. You can always leave me a voice message through the Anchor app or at the Anchor website, or you can email me at arcane.alienist@gmail.com. Once again, I appreciate you listening. Thanks so much.